Well, good morning, everyone, and very warm welcome to that ECFR webinar on European views on Russia, Ukraine, and the frantic diplomacy that we are witnessing these days. The idea behind this gathering is to understand where European countries stand on this question and how do they even understand the situation. What is it actually what we are talking about? What is Russia planning? How does the US intend to tackle the issue? Europe has been largely left out of game, even though in the NATO format, the US informs, maybe even consults. But even so, we had a feeling that much of the confusion in the current discussions stems partly because people have different perceptions on what is it actually that we are dealing with. So we have invited people from 6 European countries, 5 EU plus the UK, to give us short overviews of how the situation is understood and interests defined in the countries. And later on, we hope to decide a little bit as to what could be Europe's leverage to affect the situation. Europe as Europe, and Europe as the EU. Sadly, we have to make that distinction. And our panelists come from 6 European countries. We have France, Germany, Poland, Sweden, Spain, and the UK. We wanted to have sort of diverse collection of views represented. And I think we now ask speakers to give their country's views in, try to stick to 5 minutes, 6 is also fine, no longer please, because we are many, we are 6 people and only 2 hours. And we decided, let's start with France. Madeleine Courant works for French policy planning. In France has always been the country, well, especially recently, especially President Macron has said that we need to discuss Europe's geopolitical order with Russia. So how do people in Paris, policymakers in Paris feel now when essentially Russia has imposed that very conversation to the US? Madeleine, please.
Thanks, Kadri. Hi, everyone. So as Kadri said, I work as a policy planner for the French MFA. As such, I just wanted to flag that what I'm going to say is not an expression of French official positions. Kadri, we know Putin likes to keep as wide the range of options for himself as possible. The Russian buildup of troops near Ukraine could mean plenty of things. It could mean we want to attack Ukraine. It could mean we want NATO out of Europe, or we want a new security treaty, or we want the Minsk agreements to be applied by Kiev, or it could even also mean, hey, there's not only China around, please pay attention. And actually, it's all of it at the same time. And I don't think we should over-rationalize Russia's behavior with a supposed Ukrainian obsession of Putin, nor of an obsession of getting the US out of Europe, nor of any kind of obsessions. All of this is true to some extent. But all of this is also part of a multifaceted narrative that Putin and his friends adapt to the constraints and the opportunities of the day. It's obvious that the Russian objectives have adjusted to US's reaction during this crisis. Then on the US's side, what I see is that sounding the alarm about a unique threat helps obviously mobilize your own public opinion and your allies and rally everyone around one objective, deter Putin from invading Ukraine. This is good, obviously. But then what if Putin's intention is not invading Ukraine or he's changed his mind? In a December article, the American Institute of the Studies of War recommended, I quote, to avoid conceding to or threatening Russia more than is needed to deter an attack Putin probably does not intend to launch. Today, what we see is that Putin managed to make sure that Russia cannot be parked as an issue. He has distracted a fair part of US's attention away from its China's agenda. He has imposed his own agenda of a bilateral US-Russia conversation on Europe's security. Russian leadership also managed to focus the attention on Ukraine, absorbing a very big chunk of our resources and capacities onto a hypothetical conflict with this country. As Duncan's colleague in Chatham House wrote recently in a brilliant piece for The Guardian, the approach the US has taken seems to completely disregard the wide range of options for hostile action that don't actually involve invading anywhere. You know, to quote another brilliant British expert, Mark Galeotti once said that Putin and his entourage were driven by an intelligence mindset, opposed to a military mindset. I think this is a very important point. It explains why the Russian leadership tends to prefer deception tactics, what is called maskirovka, covert war, proxy war, the so-called hybrid war, rather than direct confrontation with its lots of risks and casualties. Today, the fact is that without actually attacking anybody, Russia managed to reach quite powerful effects. For the third month in a row, it has been sowing fear and confusion. Moscow typically resorts to a strategy that weaponizes psychology, a strategy that combines the psychological effects of uncertainty and intimidation. I remember one Russian figure, perhaps Surkov, but I'm not sure, saying once that the impact of the subversion people expect from Russia is as effective as the impact of the subversion they actually deploy. Then do we feel threatened in France? Yes, we certainly do, because we know that the current Russian leadership is dangerous. They have no scruples of any sort. They will violate all rules, if only this appears the right thing to do to them when balancing costs and benefits. This doesn't mean they have unlimited options or might. So what should we do? First, keep calm. As our British friends say, or rather used to say, evacuating personnel doesn't seem to be the right signal to send to Moscow now. Try to keep our sang-froid. Then get ready for different types of scenarios. We now have an idea of what we would do if Russia attacks Ukraine. But then what if they attack elsewhere? I think Belarus, think what is happening in Africa, watch everywhere. What do we do in case of a non-military attack? Think gas supplies. And what if they do not attack at all, but keep over the months military pressure with nothing significant apparently happening? How do we counter this new Russian game in the long run? This could very possibly turn out to be a marathon rather than a sprint. And finally, of course, remain united. Being united doesn't mean being all lined up behind US's lead. It rather means voicing the same messages to Moscow in order to achieve the same objectives and coordinate very closely all the way. Moscow's goal is to get the Europeans out of the game. They say that's because Europeans are irrelevant, but we don't have to believe this is true. Actually, they also want to avoid the complexity of dealing with multiple actors. It is common to say that Putin has an advantage because he embodies a fairly unified actor and that it is easy for him to foster our divisions. But then we should also bear in mind that Russia has to face, seen from its viewpoint, some kind of a Western Hydra with multiple heads, you know, the US, NATO, the EU, the UK, member states taken separately, etc. You know, a little bit like in that Russian fairy tale, Chudo Yuda, with 8 or 9 heads. This is a joke, of course, but our objective should be to be this Hydra confronting Putin. Because, and I'll finish on that, Kadri. Once more, our tactical disagreements hinder our capacities, but only in the short term. In the longer term, we are strong because we agree on the fundamentals. Thanks very much.
Microphone, Kadri, your mic.
Indeed, I was told to mute myself. I followed the orders. Thank you, Madeleine. That's exactly what we wanted from you. Optimistic start to the discussion. And from here, we will go to Sweden. Diana Janse, former Swedish diplomat, now think tanker. Diana, Sweden has, in my view, been sort of one of the most normatively minded countries in the European Union. You really take seriously Paris Charter-based European order. You want to adhere not just to the spirit of it, but also letter, very firmly both. So how does Sweden look at the situation where it seems that Putin is using threat of war to impose a renegotiation of these very principles on the West, including the US, that, given its concern about China, might be better disposed to have that conversation than many in Europe? Yeah.
Thank you, Kadri, and good morning, everybody. A pleasure of taking part in this conversation. Well, if I start with describing Sweden's understanding of what's happening, it will be very much from a normative perspective, because I think there is a clear understanding what's on the table is a Russian attempt to sink the European security order, asking for binding security guarantees and demanding buffer zones in Europe. It's more that Russia's military and diplomatic threats are directed to Ukraine as a state, but also to NATO as an alliance. In essence, the core of the issue then is the idea of states' freedom and independence and the rule of law, all principles very dear to Sweden. The response to this from a Swedish perspective, I would divide into two parts. First, if you look at the security policy establishment, what is going on is seen as a very serious issue, and is interpreted as a real shift in our security environment, something different than we faced before. It was telling, we have an annual security and defense policy conference in January every year, and it was this year it was really a different tone. If you look at security expert and expert authorities, there was a very clear consensus on what was at stake, on Russia's aggressive behavior, the buildup, and the impossible demands launched by Russia. So there was really a message of deep concern echoing from our Supreme Commander to the head of the military intelligence, individual security policy experts, etc., and also some part of the party leaders, from some of the party leaders that took part in that conference. But then on the other hand, we have the response of the government. And I think just for context and understanding, we should say we have a weak minority government. It's led by the Social Democrats. It's the weakest government we ever had since 78, 79. The party leader and the prime minister, she's newly elected. We have general elections coming in September this year, so that is for the timing. And also the government that took then power 7 years ago, just after the illegal annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine, has, despite this continuous trend of increasing security threats, failed to step up or speed up the buildup of our own military capabilities during these years. Some has been done, mostly pushed by the opposition, but far from enough. So this is sort of the context of the government. The government's response has been very much a rule-based one, to reiterate the rules and norms we want to uphold. There has been little in terms of backing up this by a needed power base to secure it, basically, when it's now challenged by Russia. At least in the Swedish domestic area. No Swedish military support to Ukraine is being discussed, no increased defense spending, as I mentioned, etc. So, but also then from a normative front, and also in our deep belief in political talks and diplomatic solutions, a strong support for diplomatic efforts, a strong support for sanctions, EU unity, etc., etc. But as far as I know, no own Swedish initiatives. It's interesting also, there is an emergent split on in the debate on what to do at this critical juncture, as it's seen from a Swedish perspective. We have a long tradition of a broad consensus on issues of national security policy, but these have sort of drifted away in recent years. There is one reason is that a large part of the opposition wants a Swedish NATO membership, but for the Social Democrats that are in power, this is an issue they're desperately fighting to keep off the table, as it is a very sensitive issue within the party. And the opposition has now at this stage called for deliberations on our national security, and only yesterday were the first true round of consultations with all party leaders. But again, no real decision was taken on what Sweden should do in order to, in the short term, for instance, beef up our own resilience and defense capabilities. The government went as far as saying that the other parties in parliament would be consulted on the national security strategy that government is working on. But she also said, the PM also said she would go back and think whether this was the time to sort of call in the Swedish Defense Commission and agree on military deterrence measures. So my sense is that the government is in part of sleepwalking into this crisis. There is no sense of urgency in stark contrast to this sort of security policy establishment. So, well, you also in your set of questions you sent ahead of this, Kadri asked, do people feel war is likely? And I said, I would answer yes, indeed. But there is little in-depth analysis in Swedish debate how this would actually look on the ground, what the options are, what consequences it would have on Europe and Sweden in terms of economic downturn, stress on the financial system, propaganda, hybrid threat, energy disruptions, etc. Is more a statement of that all this could happen, but actually what it would look like. There is very little detail or sort of scenarios on that. So it's on a quite abstract level, but definitely a fear for that war could happen. Do we feel threatened? Yes and no. We always feel threatened by Russia. We are where we are geographically. And I think there is there is this, the Swedes have an instinct threat awareness vis-à-vis Russia. At the same time, it's paired with a sense of that direct war is impossible. I think, and I shouldn't say impossible, but unthinkable. We have been at peace for 200 years. We don't have the recent memories of war as all our neighbors have, and that has marked us. Yeah, so, well, I think in terms of where we are and where we will push, it will be, our core reflex is to call for political solutions to any conflict. And this reflexes triggered also this time. And we will continue to reiterate the rules and norms we want to uphold. And we will continue to back up diplomatic efforts. I'm personally very pessimistic about chances to agree on anything, since in my understanding, Russians' demands have been formulated the way they have, because they are impossible to meet. And whatever we give them diplomatically, they will come back for more. And we continue, well, we just risk eroding the principles we should be prepared to defend by force if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. Sounds like Sweden.
Yes.
Let's move to Germany. Stefan Meister is one of the best known and most prominent German Russia watchers, also plugged in pretty well with some parties in the new government, as I understand. And Germany, needless to say, is much talked about these days, because the new government's line on Russia and Ukraine has caused lots of confusion internationally. I'm inclined to take a generous view as an honorary German myself, Berlin-based. I don't think it is as bad as English language press makes it to look, but Stefan will tell us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And exactly, I'm normally explaining in Germany, Russia. And now I try to explain Germany also on Russia and on Eastern Europe in this context. Yes, I think it's really not useful to have this Germany bashing now. So it seems to be more topic, partly more topic than Russia itself. But I think, and it plays also in the hands of Mr. Putin, I think, definitely. But I think there are also some reasons why this is the case. Yes, we have a new German government with a three-party coalition, which is still searching its position on Russia and Ukraine and on the current crisis. So there seems to be no common homogene perspective on this. And I think the reason for this is that this government coalition wanted to focus on domestic policy, and it was not prepared for a big foreign policy crisis. And I think this is the first stress test. And I think until now, this government has failed, yeah, on this stress test. I think we have to understand, and I think this is always, but this is something we always have to say, the German society and elites are divided on how to deal with Russia. I think this has a tradition in Germany, and this split goes also through the parties. And we can see this particular with the Social Democrats and also with the Greens. So it's not only the Social Democrats, but also the Greens are divided on how to deal with Russia and also in terms of security issues. There's a strong tradition of Ostpolitik in the Social Democratic Party, but also in relevant parts of the society and in the institutions. I think that's also important. In the Bundeswehr, but also in other institutions, you have this kind of legacy. And change to interweavement is still an issue. You are still asking Germany about this, although it has proved wrong with Putin's Russia. I think there's no discussion anymore. It does not work. Yeah. German elites take this conflict serious, but they react as they always react, with diplomacy and try to calm it down. Germany still has the illusion to be in a comfort zone. I think this is really a mental problem, and does not want to leave this comfort zone. Even if there is no comfort zone anymore, we still somehow try to stay in. Yeah. My impression is that many in the decision-making circles believe that Russia will not attack Ukraine. I think I heard this several times. It is a bluff for negotiations with the US, and we need to increase our diplomacy and we'll fix it in this way. So I think there is not this kind of history you partly have in US discussions about attack, which is soon coming. I think there's no impression that our security situation is really challenged. I think that makes really difference also to the Baltic states and to the Nordic states. And also other European partners. And at the same time, there is a clear understanding that Russia undermines the European security order, and we have to respond and to resist to it. I think there's really a consensus about this. But how to do it, I think that really makes a difference. In the past, Germany always had the right rhetoric, standing with the allies, supporting rule-based order, and it was also willing and able to act diplomatically. Yeah, I think Merkel really was leading Europe on Ukraine. I think this time the German government has neither the right action or no action, nor an understandable rhetoric. So I think it fails in both, yeah, in action and in communication. And I think this is really a communication disaster of the government in a time where communication is so crucial. And this is very cautiously also observed in Moscow. There's a lack of leadership on Russia and Ukraine in the German government. Everybody seems to be able to say what he or she wants to say, which is in this situation just unthinkable. Yeah, the new foreign minister needs to grow into the position. I think she has the heart on the right side, Annalena Baerbock, but she still needs to learn in the job. And the chancellor does not lead or bring any clarity in the German position. Maybe there is no clarity. I'm afraid a little bit about this. This gives room for all those who do not want to escalate relations with Russia, and there are a lot of in Germany, anyway critical about the US and its role, about NATO's role, and even about nuclear sharing. So there is just nobody who gives the direction where Germany goes at the moment. At the same time, deep in the institutions, there are people in the second and third row which do not share the official position that we need to deter Russia and need a clear message. And I think, like General Schönbach, who was fired a couple of days ago, I think these people seem to admire Putin to some extent. Yeah, and I think this is not just an exception. You have in the institutions people who think really differently. Talking about Nord Stream 2, this government seems to fall back behind Angela Merkel. We are not sure if Nord Stream 2 will really be sanctioned by Germany, and that might become also a test for the coalition. If then the war starts, and we really discuss this in a serious way. And we have to say also that Nord Stream 2 is very popular in the German society. Since the US Trump has started to sanction, or under Trump, it has started to be sanctioned. It has become a lot of attention and also popularity. What we see now is the result of a lack of strategic culture and will of the ruling elites to lead a necessary foreign policy debate and provide financing for a relevant policy toolbox. And I think this is also the legacy of the former government. This is not only about this government. I'm close to finish, Kadri, just 2 or 3 sentences. I think the world around Berlin has changed. Russia defines Germany and the EU as opponents it wants to weaken. Germany is the main target of Russian disinformation campaigns and hacker attacks in Europe, but we still have no serious debate on how an updated Russia and Eastern Europe policy should look like. No serious debate. We have a lot of debates, but not a serious debate. To sum up, Germany is lacking leadership in the conflict at the moment. It is divided on how to deal with Russia. That means also that the EU is lacking leadership on the crisis. It divides the EU and transatlantic relation and weakens Europe in the whole situation. All this has become a discussion about credibility and reliability of Germany. And I do not see that the new ruling coalition is able to fix the lack of trust with their allies. And my last sentence, as a result, Germany might lose its position as the country in Europe who deals with Russia and Eastern Europe. That was over decades Germany's unique feature, Alleinstellungsmerkmal. It is up to the Chancellor to take lead and to improve the communication, bring clarity in the debate, and also on sanctions, and end the cacophony in his own party. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, that was harsh, but yeah, I think we all miss Angela Merkel a little bit in this crisis. Let's move on to Poland. Poland is one country you could normally rely on countering Russia on most matters, on most occasions. At the same time, the nature of its current government makes sure that it's harder for Poland to have influence in the EU than has been the case in some earlier times. Not to even mention leading the European response. So Poland is represented by our very own Piotr Puras. He's CFR Bureau Chief in Warsaw. Piotr, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Kadri, and very warm welcome also from my side. I will start with perhaps I will of course come to the Polish position or Polish role in this conflict, but perhaps start with the more general assessment as seen from Warsaw, where we are in this conflict. And I think the sense in Warsaw is that we are facing a very dangerous scenario. So I think the threat of even an all-out invasion against Ukraine is in Warsaw treated very seriously. And I think there is, I remember a couple of days ago, some Ukrainian experts published an analysis which found some echo saying that an invasion against Ukraine is not likely within 2-3 weeks because Russia is not well prepared for that. And I think this is not what we not the information or analysis we gather in Warsaw. And I think according to the US intelligence, the picture is much gloomier. And what we see also, and what Poland is very much concerned about, is the military buildup in Belarus on an unprecedented scale. The military drills being planned, I think Strategic Resolved is the name, in the upcoming weeks, exceeds everything we have seen previously. And it seems as if the nature of this crisis was also in military terms of a completely different proportion than anything else we have seen in the past. So I think, so this is the sense of really an unprecedented escalation which we are facing, and I think there is a kind of difference to what Madeleine said, that there are various options. Of course, we don't know what's happening, but what I want to stress is that from the Warsaw perspective, the situation is really very, very serious. And then the second point is what are Putin's goals? And I think, of course, we know all these discussion, and so I don't want to go into details, but I think the bottom line from the Warsaw perspective, that this is much more than Ukraine is at stake. So this is not an Ukraine crisis in a sense that the Normandy format could help solve the problem, because Putin is interested in solving the Donbas issue, but rather this is a European security order crisis. And also the demands Putin laid out in December are taken basically seriously as exactly the goals Putin has, and this is what he wants to achieve. So that leads me to the next point, which is what is the adequate response. And as much as, of course, also Warsaw believes that negotiations are important and that we need to embark on them, I think the deterrence aspect is key. So that all negotiation, all dialogue should be backed up by a credible deterrence. And I think this deterrence element is still not very strong. Because of the issues also Stefan referred to, the position of Germany, because of some divisions within the European Union, the unpreparedness of the EU when it comes to the sanctions policy. Perhaps over the last few days something has changed, but still we know that it's not that the argument that we shouldn't let Putin see our cards. I think it's a little bit cynical, because I don't think we really know what is on our cards. So there is no real consensus within the European Union around what should be an adequate response in these various scenarios also Madeleine referred to. So I think, so this is the sense in Warsaw, is that this deterrent aspect is not enough. And then the question, the question of the negotiations, I think this is of course key. Warsaw was for some time very much afraid that we could fall back behind maybe not the NATO Warsaw Summit decisions, but behind what the Americans discussed with Warsaw recently, and strengthening of eastern flank, because beyond what has been already done, and first communications from Washington were that basically that could be put up to negotiations with Putin, that the messaging from Washington was maybe, we will refrain from strengthening eastern flank if Putin refrains from an invasion against Ukraine. I think these concerns have not proven right. I mean, at the moment, the Americans are talking about a buildup, further military buildup in the eastern flank as a form of deterrence. But still, the NATO response and the US response, of course, will be looked or analyzed very carefully in Warsaw, and the issue what comes next. I think the sense in Warsaw is that we are already now in a completely different security situation than we were a couple of months ago, and that it will not change. So basically what we agreed within NATO so far when it comes to the military response or military preparedness of NATO is kind of out of date. So that there is an upcoming new discussion about how NATO should react on the military situation, completely new military reality in this part of Europe, and also there is a lot of skepticism about the idea of opening a new European channel of discussions with Putin. The sense is that it's very unclear what Europeans on their own could bring to the table and what could be the added value. I'm putting this criticism very cautiously because I think there are also much stronger words being used in the Polish debate. And finally, I think the last remark is about Poland and Poland's role. And this is indeed, I think, Poland is not very visible like Germany, or even less visible than Germany in this context. I could imagine, you know, in a different reality, a Polish prime minister touring around Europe and basically coming up with a number of ideas and proposals. This is not taking place because I think Poland knows that its voice is not really very much heard in Europe, and also Ukraine is not betting anymore on Poland as the main ally in the European Union. We now have a conflict with Ukraine over railway transit of Polish goods coming from China over Ukraine to Poland, and Ukraine is blocking this transit. You know, in this kind of situation, you know, doing this kind of things doesn't seem to be very rational. But I think probably this is a sign that Ukraine knows that Poland cannot help much. Although I think the Polish diplomacy and the Polish government is doing quite a lot in the framework of NATO, is diplomatically, and we also offer some military support to Ukraine. But I think the impact of these activities is very much limited by the political realm. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Piotr. That is thoughtful and realistic. Let's move on to Spain. Nicolas Petro is Russia Watcher in Spain, currently affiliated with Institute of Statecraft. Nicolas, to what extent does Southern Europe care? And you know, that is always a question when we have a crisis with Russia. Do they even care up there in the south? And if they do, why? Is it that you feel threatened yourselves? Is it the solidarity issue with your European NATO allies? Is it normative, worried about geopolitical order? What is the sense in Spain? Please.
Okay, so thank you, Katri, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. Well, to start with your question, yes, the South, or at least Spain, cares about what's going on in Ukraine and about the eastern part of Europe. And I think more and more it is perceived that this is a serious problem to everyone, which is also growingly or increasingly connected or probably intertwined with the southern flank of NATO, with the growing role of Russia in North Africa, Eastern Mediterranean. This tension is also moving towards the Western Mediterranean. So I think there is a growing understanding that these issues are connected, and Spain, I mean, this may have a serious impact on Spanish national interest and security. So yeah, but it's also part, I mean, it's also a matter of solidarity. Yes, definitely. And well, in the last few days, there has been, I mean, the Spanish position has raised some attention, yeah, over the last days. And well, I might say that, well, this is good news well, Spain is a very active contributor to international mission, has participated in all, or if not all, in almost all NATO and EU missions abroad. So in terms of commitment, nothing has really changed in the last, let's say, 10 days. What is new is a clear will of being more visible politically and send a clear message on where Spain stands, I mean, vis-à-vis those challenging the European security order, because that's, I think, the understanding of the government, or at least the part of the government which is in charge of, I mean, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that's definitely good news, and that might play well into in strengthening the European unity in this regard. However, having said this, and in order to moderate a bit or lower a bit the expectations, 2 or 3 comments about that. First is that this commitment about deployments in the Black Sea of this frigate was already scheduled before, so it's nothing new, or it's not a new development, but something has been slightly advanced in order to, well, to send this political message, yeah, and show solidarity with the rest of allies at NATO. However, what if finally there is a pretty serious conflict over Ukraine, and there are military tensions in the Black Sea as well? That I don't know. Well, unlike what has been said already by some others, by some speakers, I'm not that sure that it's so clear what will be the response should the war start in Ukraine and around Ukraine. So the tensions in the Black Sea and perhaps in other theaters like the Baltics, Nordics. I'm not that sure about that clear commitment and clear response. Because still this deployment is perceived as part of a regular peacetime mission, yeah, to increase deterrence, but it's definitely not a combat one. So I think that that's an issue. And if the tensions increase or the conflict, I mean, evolves in Ukraine, I think there will be a lot of pressure over Spain. Spain has been already suffering in the last years already, serious cyber attacks and strong and vicious disinformation campaigns, operations, and activities. And this has triggered a lot of concern. And this is probably the main driver to change the perception about the Russian policy in Spain, about Russia in Spain. So it's basically what they do is triggering these changes in the perceptions. Definitely something has changed related to this in Spain, how at least how some let's say part of the strategic community sees this issue related to Russia. Clearly now there is a consensus that definitely there is an issue, so and it affects us. So we are part of this discussion, which is good. However, the Russian framing, particularly when it comes to Ukraine, is still pervasive, and that's bad news. So what I mean with that, in the public discussion involving different kind of participants, yeah, and the general audience, still this, I mean, it is perceived that there are two equally aggressive and threatening kind of sides. On one side, on one hand NATO, on the other hand Russia, which is somehow surrounded. So these kind of views are very still pervasive. Or this idea that there is a clear ambition of NATO to swallow Ukraine, things like that. And Ukrainians, unfortunately, are very almost invisible in the eyes of the Spanish public opinion and policy makers, commentators. I mean, that's definitely not good news. And honestly, it is a bit surprising how easily sometimes we have moved from a debate in which the EU, the European integration process, was very much about, I mean, erasing wars from the European soil and leaving behind what was, I mean, from the Westphalia Treaty, all this approach, and how easily everyone assumes that, oh, it's good to have spheres of influence, and some countries must accept that they are buffer states, things like that. Yeah, it's very amazing, but I think it's also related to the fact that many still do not realize the implications of the changes that Russia is demanding, and in terms of the rules of war and peace in the European soil. So I think that that's a serious problem. And just two final quick comments on the European unity and how to strengthen it. And I think, I mean, here, I mean, I'm a bit optimistic about the Spanish position and how Spain will develop over this, will perform over this crisis. But about the European unity, I think it's difficult to be optimistic. I think it's pretty obvious, and this is seen from Spain, of course, these strong, profound divisions among member states. And I think one particular problem is the lack of shared understanding of the Russian goals. Many still think that this is only about Ukraine, and I think that's a mistake. Well, it's pretty obvious that it's not like that. You just need to read the documents that the ultimatum that Russia published on December 17th. It's about the European security order and rules of the game in Europe and beyond. So it's a profound change. So that's what is at stake. This is, so Ukraine, let's say, is the first meal, but the European security order is the main course. And that's a radical change of what we have up to now. And hopefully we will, we will keep our current European security order, but it's seriously challenged by Russia, and has been mentioned it already. I think our biggest problem is that the deterrence capability in Europe is rather limited. Both, it's almost inexistent at the EU level. I think we need to be very clear that sanctions do not have this effect. Sanctions are, I think, a necessary tool and part of our response, but sanctions have a limited deterrence potential. And more and more, if credibility is in question, because there are different messages coming from different capitals about the intensity of these sanctions should Russia finally launch a massive attack against Ukraine. And at NATO level, still our deterrence, is still there, of course. And I think, and that's my last point, that we need to be very careful also about these discussions, because now, okay, we have two or three elements, which we need to combine. One is that in the absence of the US security umbrella, unfortunately, the European deterrence is in existence or not really credible. At the same time, we know that the US is really, the interest of the US in the European Eurasian affairs is diminishing. They are really focusing or putting all attention in the Indo-Pacific and the question of China. These are connected, but they are really focusing on that. So we need to be careful about that. And also be very careful when we have these discussions, because we are not talking about defense. We are talking mostly about industrial policies and defense industry, which is part of it, but it's not defense. Is a completely different thing, and we are seeing that in the borders of Ukraine, because what Russia is doing is using its military tool. It's not an industrial policy. What Russia is now showing in to Ukraine in order to force their surrender. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you very much. And we have now we are moving to our last speaker, but before that, some instructions. My colleagues suggest that you use raise hand or Q&A functions for questions, but I can see many questions are in the chat as well. We will try, of course, to address these as well. Some show of European disunity in how to use Zoom tools. But now let's move to the UK. UK is our last speaker. That's the consequence for Brexit. Duncan Allen, currently Chatham House Fellow, formerly with the Foreign Office. So give us a picture of how it's seen in London. I mean, London seems to share the US intelligence assessment of massive imminent war sort of more confidently than some other Europeans. The UK has also been actively equipping Ukraine, giving aid, including military. But what is that driven by domestically? To what extent what is at stake in view of London? To what extent is response guided by hopes that UK can make a difference on the ground in Ukraine or in diplomatic process? To what extent are there sort of secondary concerns such as staying close to the US, proving Brexit a success by demonstrating independent action, and last not least, there are domestic problems that are uncomfortable, and I could imagine that some people would be happy to have a serious crisis to deal instead. So Duncan, please.
Thank you, Kadri, and thank you, ECFR. I should say at the outset that I've been out of the civil service now for over 4 years, so I'm speaking very much as an outsider looking in. And I'm not privy to official UK thinking. I'm having to form judgments about what I think is happening. And as I do that, I'm also conscious as a former civil servant that there will be a great deal happening of which none of us are aware. So I just want to make those caveats at the outset to hedge what I'm about to say. I'll say a few words about what I make of or how I interpret the direction of UK official thinking, and I'll offer a few other comments as well, more broadly about my own view about UK policy towards Russia. And if I might be permitted, Kadri, very briefly, my friend and former Foreign Office colleague Ian Bond and I have actually just written a new paper for Chatham House on UK policy towards Russia after Brexit, which is about to come out soon. So briefly, in terms of how I think the UK government views the current crisis, well, my sense is that the current crisis is seen as hugely significant and very dangerous indeed, because of the possibility of large-scale conventional war in Europe, because of the judgment that Russia poses a present and immediate threat to the sovereignty of Ukraine, and more broadly to stability and security in Europe. My sense is that the UK government views the crisis as a test, first and foremost, of NATO unity, especially as regards solidarity with NATO's Eastern European members. The UK has been really quite active diplomatically in recent weeks and months, I would say, in a number of bilateral and multilateral formats, focusing on mobilizing practical support for Ukraine. You rightly highlighted, Kadri, the way in which the UK is now supplying certain types of lethal defensive military equipment to Ukraine alongside one or two other European countries. But mobilizing support for Ukraine, mobilizing NATO unity, and also actively taking part in coordination with the EU and other Western countries over the possibility of new sanctions. Significantly, I think the UK's diplomatic activity includes dialogue with Russia. So our Prime Minister Boris Johnson has had, I think, at least 2 phone calls with President Putin. Defence Minister Shoigu is expected in London next month. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, I think, is visiting Moscow next month. As I just mentioned, the UK government is putting a lot of time into coordination with allies, including with the EU, particularly on the sanctions front in the case of the EU. My sense is that with the current government, however, the priorities are very much with the US and NATO, perhaps not surprisingly. Now, just finishing on this note, my sense is that the ability of the current UK government to coordinate allies and partners and to influence their thinking is, of course, these days undermined, in some cases significantly weakened by various aspects of Brexit, which I'm happy to discuss later on. And it also is affected, I can only imagine, by the current political disarray in this country, which looks awful enough when you're sitting in London watching it. I can only imagine what it looks like to people abroad. Chances of significant military escalation. Well, I think within the UK expert community, there are a variety of views, I think it's fair to say. My judgment again is that the UK government is seriously concerned about the possibility of serious military escalation by Russia in Ukraine. My own view, for what it's worth, is that this is not inevitable, but it is a distinct possibility as long as Russia continues to practice this particularly brutal form of what I would call coercive diplomacy. But as I say, there are a variety of views within the UK expert community on this. Does the UK feel endangered? Again, there are a variety of views on this. I think it's fair to say I don't think anybody seriously expects a Russian military attack on the UK, but there are genuine concerns and fears about the perceived threats from Russia in areas like assassinations on UK territory for obvious reasons, further cyber-enabled attacks, espionage, information war, and for the UK, I think a particular concern has to be the potential danger posed by illicit finance from Russia and other countries. A couple of thoughts briefly about UK policy towards Russia more generally. Clearly, UK official views of Russia have shifted quite markedly since, well, over the last decade or so. So the last year's integrated review refers to Russia as the most direct threat to UK security, which I think, my own view is, I think that's probably about right. I still believe, however, that there is a lack of clarity and a lack of realism as regards UK official thinking about Russia. About 18 months ago, the UK Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee published a report on Russia policy, which referred in passing to the UK government's cross-Whitehall Russia strategy, which is a document that remains classified, although there have been occasional public references to it. And the UK government's Russia strategy apparently still envisages a time in the future when Russia may have eventually moved towards a more cooperative relationship with the UK and its Western partners. Cooperative, I presume, in the terms that Western policymakers would understand that term. Now, it's not clear to me whether that's an aspiration or just sheer optimism. In either case, that's not a sufficiently strong basis on which to form policy. First and foremost, what the UK still needs, in my view, is a hard-headed definition and calculation of UK interests and UK Russia relevant interests. I don't see that having been spelt out yet. There also has to be a clearer understanding of why the political relationship with Russia is broken, why it has been so bad for so long. And I think there's a pretty simple explanation for that, which is that the UK and Russia have very few shared interests. There are some, but there really are not many. And historically, that has tended to be the pattern. If we dial back over 100 years, even further, the UK-Russia relationship has tended to be bad, sometimes very bad. There have been periods where it's been relatively good, but those periods where it's been relatively good have also been short. Now, that ought to tell us something about why this relationship is inherently fragile and volatile. I think also there's a need for UK policymakers to understand much better how the UK is perceived by Russia. First and foremost, that the UK is not seen as Russia's equal in any meaningful sense, that it is seen very much as a second-tier power in long-term decline, and which has been further diminished by Brexit, all of which puts the UK in a potentially very awkward position post-Brexit. First and foremost, because the UK crucially needs allies and partners to deal effectively with Russia. And of course, the acrimonious nature of the way in which Brexit has been handled by successive British governments has undermined the UK's ability to build the alliances and the partnerships that it needs long-term to deal with a Russia that almost certainly is going to be in conflict with core UK interests for the foreseeable future. I think that feeds in more generally to a wider issue, which has been true, I think, of most British governments, probably since the Second World War, which there is a continuing tendency to exaggerate the UK's power and influence globally, not just with Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. This is great. Europe might not have a unity of views, but definitely there's lots of nuance in this discussion. Let's move to questions and answers. I have some from chat and Q&A sent to my phone, but maybe we would start with people who raised their hands and would want to ask the question in person. Can we enable? Marie, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you all. Thank you very much, Kadri. It's such a pleasure to see old friends, Stefan, Piotr, Duncan. I have many questions, but I will focus on one to Diana about Sweden. I was surprised, Diana, that you didn't mention the debate in Sweden and in Finland about joining NATO. Could you say something about this? And I have two questions to Stefan about the new German government's position. How do you see the Nord Stream 2 question evolving? I remember our time together in DC in 15-16, and we had hot discussions about Nord Stream 2 at the time. And I remember telling you that, unfortunately, the French President Hollande, who inherited this very bad legacy of Sarkozy about the Mistral helicopter carriers. And Hollande pulled out of the deal late, only in September 14. And so he missed the right opportunity to do so much earlier in the spring. And so he missed the opportunity to build capital on this decision. How do you look at it, Stefan? I mean, don't you think that Nord Stream 2 will not survive this huge war scare? And in that case, how do you think the government will pull out of it? And the second question is about the Minsk negotiation. What is your view? What is the German government's expectations from from yesterday's meeting in Paris, and what can come out of it? Is it just diplomacy for diplomacy? Because I think what we've all agreed on this morning, listening to you, is that this is not a Ukraine crisis; it is a Russia crisis, and jeopardizing European security. So, in that case, is it a good thing to focus on Ukraine? And should not we advise our governments to then put on the table the whole European security question and discuss Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and should we continue to focus on Ukraine in the medium term? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Marie. There are questions also electronically along the same lines. Tatiana Jean asks, addresses to Madeleine, what we can expect from Putin-Macron conversation tomorrow. And to all speakers, what's the future of the Minsk agreements? Is that just one piece of a bigger puzzle, or where it goes? There's also other question: will resumption of Normandy format be accepted by Ukraine and other countries in Eastern neighborhood? Then also more questions about Germany. Katarina Wolchuk says that Stefan's picture of Germany's Russia paralyzes is rather bleak, difficult to disagree. You also say that harsh external critique is not helpful. Can you explain why? Could feedback influence German policy and in which way? Also, is there any chance, that comes from Elzbieta Kacha, is there any chance Germany could resume its role as leader of European response to Russia's aggressive actions, the way Merkel played it in 2014 in a fairly central role? I think we can answer these now. We'll have several more rounds of questions. There are many, and I apologize in advance. I discriminate against the questions that address the Russia-specific angles, Putin's thinking, and so forth. It is true that we have several Russia experts here, but let's stick to discussing European perceptions as opposed to Putin, because otherwise we enter Putin's head, we will never come out of that. That's it's not the direction to take. But please, Diana, first questions were to you. Let's start from you.
Thank you, Kadri, and thank you, Marie, for your question. Well, I mentioned it only briefly as in terms of that the national consensus we used to have on our security policy is broken, and that is because of NATO. That's the core of that issue. And as I also briefly said, the Social Democrats are fighting hard to try to keep that question off the table, but opposition parties there are 4 opposition parties now in parliament that are pro-NATO membership. And of course, at this juncture, there is a renewed debate about the Swedish NATO, the possibility of a Swedish NATO membership, and also I think pro-membership people, as myself, were very much encouraged also by the Finnish President Niinistö's New Year's speech, where he clearly stated the Finnish NATO option and also sort of took a stance for Sweden in this respect. And well, there is a renewed debate about this, and there is a sense of if we can't push this issue now, when will we ever? And what's also interesting, since a lot of the argument on the we want to continue to stay outside NATO side has been there is not a broad enough popular support for NATO membership. This is now shifting, so that argument is losing its relevance. So, well, I think that debate is definitely here to stay. It's very tricky for the government to handle, also because it's invested so much in an array of different security and military cooperation agreements that has nothing of the deterrence effect and the hardcore Article 5 that NATO has. But as a substitute, since this is an issue the Social Democrats wants to keep away, given its sensibility within the party. So I think we will have this debate here, and at least from my point of view, I hope we will be able to move this issue forward, and also in then close dialogue with Finland. And I should some have also in the Swedish debate on this pointed out that maybe we'll be in a situation where Finland moves faster than Sweden, and we sort of be I shouldn't say force, but we end up in a place where we have to consider this in another way, given Finland's take on it, more rapidly than we maybe anticipate. Thank you.
That linkage between Finland and Sweden has always fascinated the Estonians. We have had multiple discussions whom we could manipulate to joining so that the other would be forced to follow suit.
Stefan, keep trying.
Stefan, can you take the Germany questions? There were quite a few.
I just go through the questions you just mentioned. Thank you, Marie, for the 2 questions on Nord Stream 2. So as I always say, it was a wrong project from the beginning, and it's not getting better. Yeah. So I think the problem is it's a result of a domestic bargaining. So this has not been a result of foreign policy calculations or geopolitical debate, but it was from the beginning very much about domestic bargaining. And if we look into the coalition agreement, you see that the part on Eastern Partnership is pretty clear and strong, and the part on Russia is not very clear. You can interpret several sentences in different ways, and Nord Stream 2 is not mentioned except we bring it to the European energy regulation. Yeah, so I think that was the compromise with the Greens. So the question was, will it survive or not? I think we still have a muddling through strategy, if you want to call it like this, I think at the moment. So it's somehow discussed and somehow mentioned also by the Chancellor on one point. It is also on the table. At the same time, he was also saying it's an economic project. Yeah, so this is what I meant with fall back. And I think it will not survive if there's really an attack, I think, a large-scale attack on Ukraine. I think then the pressure also in the coalition and also from the partners, I think, will be so strong that I don't think we will stay with the project. I think it's not possible. But if there is just a hybrid attack or maybe not such a visible thing or whatever, yeah, I don't know if this will be sufficient not to sanction it. Yeah, so but. I think the Greens, most of the Greens, and also the foreign minister, they really want to stop it somehow. But it's very difficult with the coalition partner. And there's one partner with the Liberals who is pretty quiet. Yeah. So which is also not entirely supporting a stop of the pipeline. So it's still the same problem. But if there's a large-scale attack, I think I can imagine. On the Minsk negotiations, what are the German expectations? So I personally don't have expectations. I think Russia made it very clear that we don't need the Normandy format anymore. We want to talk about Donbass and Ukraine only with Washington. Yeah, so I think there is a clear message also to Paris and to Berlin. We are not really interested in this, and it brings nothing for us. Yeah, so it leads to nothing from their perspective. I think the German expectations are. So I think that's still a format where we talk with Russia. So it's a diplomatic. It's talking. Yeah, it's a topping a diplomatic format. There were some small successes also, I think, which are good. Yeah, and there are not so many other formats where we're talking. Yeah, at the moment. So I think Germany will keep it definitely, and somehow hope to maybe to do some successes here in this context. But I also think the expectations are pretty low. And yes, I think this is a Russia crisis, and we need to talk about the European security order. And I think we also have to have in mind that the US and Biden made a lot of compromises, protected also Germany in a way, yeah, on Nord Stream 2, made this deal also on Nord Stream 2, and I think from a Washington perspective, Germany is not paying back, yeah. It weakens also his position in Washington with the Congress. So and he really wanted to have Germany in managing in Europe, Russia, Eastern Europe, and other things, and I think. This is not happening at the moment, the question was if this could survive, if this could come back. I don't know. I think there is a lack of leadership at the moment. Yeah. So and Merkel had to build up also her prestige, her respect. Yeah. In Moscow, she needed also a while. Yeah, to do so. But I think we don't know if this chancellor is able to build up this kind of position, and if Germany is not only seen as a weak country, as the weak spot in Europe from a Moscow's perspective, yeah, where you have a lot of entry points also to spoiler Europe and Germany itself. I think this coalition has the potential. Also with the Greens in, but it needs really to find a common ground on foreign policy, on Russia, and on Eastern Europe and Ukraine, and then it can also play a role discussing the European security order. And maybe just on Katarzyna, what I just meant with this harsh criticism, I just had the impression in the last weeks, or in the last week, that especially the US, but also other English-speaking press, focusing more on Germany than on Russia and the Russian threat. And I think that also, it's somehow a success, maybe also of Mr. Putin, yeah, to bring the attention to other scenarios, and also maybe the failure of the German government. But I think we should be very careful how far we go in this public bashing with this relatively unexperienced government. And I just wanted to say it's not so useful, but sure, we need a clear message from the partners. We need also criticism from the partners, definitely. But I think it's not very useful to have this large-scale bashing and without any constructive approach. That was just the point I wanted to make.
I very much agree with that point. Madeleine, you had questions about Normandy format and Macron-Putin call.
Yeah, thanks, Kadri. Macron-Putin call from Tatiana. So I don't expect a major breakthrough, obviously, and it's probably not about it. It's about, as I said, an addition of pressure. To be very honest, I think if Putin as a person had any expectation out of a relationship with a Western leader, it would definitely be with Joe Biden. But again, I come back to my Hydra comparison. I mean, it's probably not the wisest metaphor, because, as you know, at the end of the tale, Ivan Tarevich kills the Hydra. But it's just to illustrate, it's about putting multiple pressure, bringing the same messages again and again in different formats. And then on Normandy, I think the questions were not addressed to me. I can just actually double what Stefan just said. I also expect France and Germany to give it a try, because it is a format of negotiations that exists. I'm not over optimistic for the same reasons as actually Stefan mentioned. But you know, the thing is, we really should try to capitalize on being a multiple actor with different leverages. We have military deterrence through NATO. We have Germany has the Nord Stream 2 powerful tool that it hesitates to use. But that's our differences are not only weaknesses. I'll stop here. If there are any more questions on Normandy, I'm happy to answer. But again, I think they were not directly addressed to me, and Stefan has put it all in a nutshell. Thanks.
Thank you. I think let's take a next round of questions. We really have many, and everyone will be able to react afterwards. Next question in live via raised hand comes from Georgi Berinsky, please.
Thank you for this opportunity. My question is the following. There are two basic arguments. On the Western side, the argument is that every state has the right, the sovereign right, to join any organization, in this case, Ukraine, NATO. On the Russian side, the basic argument is that any country's security should be built considering the caveat that it should not be at the expense or threatening the security of any other country, in this case, neighboring Russia. Now, the webinar is entitled Tensions in the East, How to Strengthen a Common European Position. From what has been said so far, there seems to be tension in the West as well over the situation. And basically my question is, if the issue is how to strengthen a European position, isn't it necessary to take into full consideration the voiced concerns of Russia in this case, in order to be realistic enough in developing a serious European position? Now, we have heard the Vice Admiral Schoenbeck's position that Russia deserves respect. Respect is a notion which has been central in the recent German elections. Basically, what I think should be considered, including by a webinar of the ECFR, is the basic approach that is necessary in order to tackle the basic challenge of peace and security in Europe. The gentleman from Great Britain has mentioned that there are very few common interests between, let's say, Great Britain and Russia. Mm-hmm. Surely one of those is having a secure and peaceful Europe. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. I think the question is a serious one and refers to the problem I've been pondering myself, how long and how we can rely on European security order that Russia increasingly disagrees with, and what would be the ways of increasing Russia's buy-in or coercing Russia into accepting it. We don't normally like to discuss it in these terms, but that I feel is the elephant in some of these rooms. We could address it in our remarks later on. Next question, also live, Dmitry Shkurko.
Thank you. My name is Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. I'm correspondent for my agency in Brussels. So I want to thank all the participants for that point of view, that the conflict we are speaking about now is not about Ukraine, it's about European security. Exactly the message we tried to convince our European partners and friends from the beginning of the conflict since 2014. I was slightly surprised by the Piotr Bura's words about some kind of conflict existing between Poland and Ukraine, because from Ukraine perspective, we have absolutely different view, especially in the context of a recent meeting between the presidents of Poland and Ukraine. So that you see, we have some kind of another hopes for solidarity and for support from the Polish people in that regard. And my question is related to that issue. Recently, there was the initiative in fact, from Foreign Office in Great Britain to create some kind of triangle union, including Great Britain, Poland, and Ukraine, to resist somehow to the Russian aggressive intentions. What do you think about that, and how could it be effective, that union? And my last remark, if I may, our Spanish colleague mentioned that Ukraine was not seen in that conflict. I can say you one thing, that Ukraine is ready to resist. It is a very widespread movement now in Ukraine, and the main price Russia would pay, it is not because of sanctions the West will imply, but the resistance of Ukrainian people will be fighting for their freedom. And it is not related know-how to a question of our membership in NATO. The Ukrainians will defend themselves, irrespective of what kind of assistance we will receive from the West. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's what I'm telling Russians, that Ukrainians will fight like hell, and when it comes to economic pressure, they are even more resilient than Russians. They reluctantly agree with me even. Next live question comes from Lottie Poswinkel, and while colleagues enable her, I will read a few questions from chat to Piotr Buras. So there is a question: there is a reference to your article that the EU has almost nothing to bring to the table, so Russia can simply ignore it. So what's the lesson from that to the EU as a whole? I think that we can say for the final words, where I will ask each of you to have at least one thought on what should be the European common position or action. And there is also one more question to Piotr about Russian military deployment in Belarus from the Polish angle. So do you feel that Russia will simulate breaching the Suwalki corridor, and what is the sort of thinking and preparation for that in Poland? But now, shall we have a live question from Lotje?
Hello, thank you so much for giving me the floor and the very interesting webinar. I was wondering, Nicolas, you mentioned that currently Europe is lacking entirely a deterrence capacity. And obviously, this is not something that we can have tomorrow. But I was wondering what, according to you, are ways forward? And are we thinking only nuclear options here, or are there also other military deterrent capabilities that we can develop, especially as you mentioned that more economic deterrence actions are less meaningful or useful? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one more live question from Shota Kineria. You have sent us messages too, but I think you can now ask in person.
Thank you, Kadri, very much for giving me the floor. And on top of what I have written in my lengthy message, I will try to very shortly consolidate my message now here in oral form as well. So it is now very clear, because Putin has articulated his ultimatums and demands in a written way, so there shouldn't be a lot of discussion about what he wants and what he is trying to achieve. And it is obvious that the only condition or precondition for him to de-escalate is for the West to acknowledge the spheres of his exclusive influence in what he sees as his near abroad. So that's partly the answer to this question or the debate about whether can we or can we not take into account Russia's positions, or is it a position or a demand or the ultimatum? That's another story. But the question is whether the West is ready to discuss the European or Euro-Atlantic security architecture where sovereignty of the states is no longer in the center and is no longer essential for this kind of new security arrangements. And here I must say that Georgia and Ukraine are not the objects of the discussion, but the subjects of the discussion. And here, whether or not Putin attacks Ukraine in an all-out war or not, still, the problem of sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia and Ukraine should be the issue not only for Georgia and Ukraine, but for the European and Euro-Atlantic security architecture. And what we see today, unfortunately, is that by this blackmail and by raising tensions and stakes and the temperature to the peak, Putin has sidelined this discussion about the problems on the ground. About Crimea, we're not even talking about, about Eastern Ukraine, about Georgia, about Nagorno-Karabakh or Transnistria or Kazakhstan or Belarus or anything else. We're now talking about whether or not he's going to attack. So my question is to everybody, is it possible, even in, in a longer term, that Europeans or Americans and Europeans will ever agree to the new rules that Russia proposes, where sovereignty of the states, even the ones that are not members of NATO and EU, is no longer the key principle of international law, international affairs, and rules and code of conduct. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Let's go. let's now go back to speakers, but not all, maybe the ones who didn't speak in previous round. And then in final remarks, we will come back to everyone. Piotr, maybe your turn. You had some questions asked to you, addressed to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kadri, and thank you for the questions and comments. And maybe I would, but I had a couple of questions which were indeed addressed to me, but I would like also to respond to Georgi Pirinski's point. I think Shota has just nailed it, mentioning that the question of sovereignty is here key. But I would perhaps add a few more remarks on that, because I think, you know, this is a question of respect for Russia's legitimate security concerns. But I think we need to be clear about that and ask ourselves how we assess those security concerns which are communicated by Russia. Is it, should we have a very simple question? Should we have a respect for concern that NATO poses a threat to Russia? Because this is basically what Putin said. I mean, is it, you know, Russia can claim it, of course, but I think Russia attacked Ukraine at a moment where Russia did not, when Ukraine did not try to access NATO, but when it's forged a closer relationship with the European Union. I think this is, it should be pretty obvious for us that the real security concern for Russia is Ukraine's prosperity, Ukraine's sovereignty, and Ukraine's well-being. And I think this is, from what we have seen over the last years, I think there is no doubt about that Russia's actual concern is that NATO expansion of NATO could happen anytime soon, or that NATO as such is a real threat to Russia, but the concerns are of a completely different nature. So I think we and then so the question is how to react, and that brings me back to the question Shota asked. I mean, are we basically ready in the with the aim to address Russia's concern to scrap the also Russia's commitments, also our commitments, our values enshrined in the Paris Charter and other documents signed over the last decades. I think that there is a certain red line which cannot be crossed, and I think even if we come to the conclusion that it is very difficult to defend those values and defend the security order if Russia is very uncomfortable with it, I think we should be very careful with drawing a conclusion that the respect for Russia's legitimate concerns basically should lead us to revising them and writing the rules of the order from scratch. So I think this is a key point here. When it comes to the question, what does the EU bring to the table? I think in my article, in which I criticized the EU's inability to reach a consensus on sanctions, I referred to this lack of instruments, a lack of power which the EU could bring to the table in negotiations, in direct negotiations with Russia. I referred more to the questions of military security policy nature, because I think clearly Russia is now interested in, as we have seen in discussions about security order, NATO enlargement, military buildup in Eastern Europe, arms control, and so on and so forth. And this is the realm where basically the European Union is not a partner. So if we if you want to engage on our own in discussions with Russia on those topics, I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we bring to the table? I mean, I think we really don't bring much, and so there is no way. Then this is a very sad truth, and I agree, and I'm actually one of the probably few in my own country who believe that the idea of European strategic autonomy and European sovereignty in the realm of security policy is an important goal. But I don't think this is the right moment to rethink or reinvent ourselves in this realm in the middle of the major geopolitical crisis we are facing. And what the EU could bring to the table is its economic clout. And I agree that sanctions have maybe, as Nicholas said, a limited efficiency, and that Russia is already quite well equipped with dollar reserves against economic sanctions. But still, this is the best instrument we have at our disposal to raise the price for Russia's aggressive behavior. And this is basically deterrence in our case, deterrence by denial or deterrence by punishment is something by which we can exactly raise the price. And we, of course, we don't know if it proves efficient, but I think unless we try it, we will, basically not learn how far we could go, and we also, if we give up on these instruments, we can forget about our actorness or actorship at all, because we don't have any other means at our disposal. And last thing, I think very briefly on Belarus and the military buildup. I think the sense I gather in Warsaw is that this is very much about Ukraine, not anything else. That this is a part of the military buildup around Ukraine. But when it comes to the exact figures, I would refer you to a very thorough analysis by the Center for Eastern Studies. I put a link in the chat with very detailed analysis for what's happening and what goals, political goals it serves.
Thank you. Nico and Duncan, would you want to briefly come in now?
Yes.
Conscious of time, I mean, we're close to final words as well, but I need to give you opportunity to speak out before that too.
Yeah, I will be very brief. 3 quick comments. Regarding this question about tensions or comment about tensions in the West, I think, well, that's right. But I think it's very important to focus on the basics. And I think it's always necessary to remember that there is only one actor which is showing that is willing to use force to change the status quo in Europe, to redraw borders, and to threaten different neighbors. I think that that's a very important factor. Basic one, this is an artificially manufactured crisis by Moscow that started to amass a big military force 8 weeks ago approximately, and that's it. And it still isn't clear to me what is the military threat that or concern that Russia is facing, because I agree with Kadri that we need to find a way to make Russia feel comfortable in this European security order. But they need to properly explain what are the real, serious or realistic concerns, because honestly, I don't see them. This is basically about dominating Ukraine and imposing over other neighbors. But it's not about facing, because there is no any military threat that Russia is facing. No one is threatening Russia from a military point of view. A comment to the Ukrainian colleague in Brussels, sorry, that was a misunderstanding. What I was saying, or what I was trying to say, is that the Ukrainians as an actor are not basically properly understood and known by the Spanish audience. That's what I was trying to say. So I'm definitely not saying, questioning their will to resist, which I think is great. And honestly, again, coming to the basics, I think they have won their right to decide their own, to decide their fate by their own. They won that in the battlefield, and that's it, their decision, absolutely. And here, one, honestly, a scaring paradox. It seems to me that it's much more easier in the eyes of Moscow to subdue the West than the Ukrainians. And this is the paradox here. So they are putting pressure on the Ukrainian border, and the West, many in the West seems ready to give up or make unacceptable concessions, not the Ukrainians, and they are really risking their lives and the future. So I think this merits a conversation and a reflection. And this brings me to my last point and comment, and thanks for the question about deterrence. Is that we need a serious conversation about that, and nuclear weapons. It's not all about nuclear, but definitely nuclear things nukes should be part of this conversation, because we need to adapt the conversation. We need a reality check of our conversation. So it's not what we like or what we dislike, but this is part of the game. And I finish with also we need to be very careful when we raise this question and this discussion. Because we tend to focus on the names and not on the substance sometimes. And we need to be careful about that, because when we talk about the European army, or when we frame it as a European army or EU army, then it's again counterproductive. This increases these tensions and this division among member states or NATO allies. And for instance, and I finish with this, let's see what Russia is doing, for instance, I think it's part of I think this strengthening these divisions is part of the Russian move, is part of the goals, yeah, because they're saying that they care and they really want this strategic autonomy, but at the same time they have been for months playing with the idea of not recognizing the EU as a political interlocutor or actor. So I think we need to be very careful, because they are really pushing for something different than what they claim openly sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Duncan.
Kadri, perhaps in the interests of time, I can just leave my comments to the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Then we have some final questions, and what we'll do, we will ask all the speakers, maybe in the order you spoke, to start with, come up with one idea what the EU or Europe should be doing. Try not to repeat one another's ideas, which means that those who speak later have harder tasks. To throw in some final questions, there are two sets of questions that I think deserve our attention and are highly relevant. These are about the sanctions. How sanctions proof is Russia? How sanctions proof are we? Craig Olifanti asks if there is a risk that we overstate our capabilities on sanctions. Grateful for European views on the extent to which Russia has sanctions proved itself. And likewise, Rebecca Harms asks about the flip side of coin. Are citizens in Europe aware the price of sanctions that Europe would have to pay in case sanctions against Russia get serious? As this is true, we will need to take some burden of suffering too. I think these are the questions that really should be thought through in Europe jointly, as well as in countries individually, because vulnerabilities are different country by country. But now, yes, for constructive ideas and any final words, you have 2 minutes. Maybe 2.5. Let's start with Madeleine again.
Do you want me also to answer on sanctions, or
yeah, you can briefly say.
Yeah, I won't say much, because I think I will just repeat what colleagues said, and the topic on sanctions is actually quite clear. It's political messaging. I think with this crisis, we've been able to turn it from what it used to be a tool for reacting into a tool for deterring, which is not that bad, and it remains just a tool among others. I wanted just to go back on the idea that the conflict is not about Ukraine, it's about European security. Obviously, I completely agree, and I must say this assertion actually sounds quite French. The difficulty probably is that we've entered the negotiation on Russia's conditions. And I very much agree with Shota and Marie Mandras on this. There are lots of topics that would be worth bringing in into that conversation with the Russians, including other so-called frozen conflicts. It is really not sure how this conversation can be successful, as obviously Western governments will not give up the basic principles. But ultimately, I think that what we should keep in mind at the end, and that several speakers said it, beginning with Dmytro Shkurko, is that Ukrainians will fight, and the Russians probably know that, and that's also probably why they haven't attacked so far. And that's actually something that we tend to forget when we panic about what will we do if the Russians attack. But I'll stop here sorry not to take up too much time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Diana, you're next.
Thank you, Kadri. Well, I just quickly on these tensions in the West, I think there are, but I think that's part of a logical process, and I'm sure that we get our act together when time is due and time is ripe. And then on a massive sanctions package with all the sanctions we can necessarily think of, I also want to see support for Ukraine militarily, politically, financially. I think it's also time for us to review our future energy strategy in Europe onwards. Where will we go in the future? But I also want to take this precious time to comment on this respect for Russia's security concern, because I think this is part of where the debate tends to go in the wrong direction. I think, as I see it, it is in Europe's interest that the current European security order remains, because at the core of it is about our country's sovereignty. But it's not when Russia then, and to meet Russian demands would be to dismantle it. And Russia, it's not that Russia is offering an alternative order with a common set of rules and norms, but what Russia wants is some rules for Russia and other rules for others. So it's this respect for Russian security concern should be then based on a disrespect of other countries' security concerns. So the securities should be respected, but not Ukraine's, not Georgia's, etc., etc. And for me, that's unthinkable. So we cannot meet this kind of respect. We cannot meet the kind of respect they're asking for, because it's contrary to our core interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan.
I just also want to say just a couple of words on this. I think the problem is Russia does not accept the security order anymore. It made this clear in 2014 in Ukraine, and I think it now has the impression it wants this confirmation, and the US and Europe are so weak that it can get more than a couple of years ago. And I think we somehow need to think about it. I think there is an aggressive actor in our neighborhood who is willing to use force and does not accept this anymore. And we need somehow to talk with this big neighbor. And I think for me the question is rather, are we willing to pay a price to keep as much as possible from this security order? And I'm not so sure. I think this leads also to the sovereignty question. Sure, I think we will support always the sovereignty of Ukraine, of Georgia, yeah, and other post-Soviet countries. But what price we are willing to pay for it? I think that's for me the key question. How did we act, or for instance, in the Karabakh War, in the Second Karabakh War, how it has changed the rules of the game, and Russia is changing the rules of the game at the moment in our neighborhood, and it thinks it can get back this sphere of influence and maybe even a confirmation for it. Yeah. So, and I think we normally just react and saying, no, we want to keep it and we stick to these rules. But I'm not so sure how much we are willing to pay for it and how far we are going. And that's why I think we need also this kind of discussion. This brings me to the sanctions. I think what we see is that we are not united on sanctions. Yeah, I think we all looking how much it costs, and I think the US already has discussed SWIFT in 2014 and 15, and they just found out it's too expensive. Yeah, even from their perspective, and from German perspective, we want to pay for the price also, for the gas also. Yeah, so we maybe need also SWIFT, and we didn't do anything on it, not anything, but not enough since this time to get less dependent on Russian gas in the opposite. So I think we need this price tag, yeah, and that needs to be clear, and Nord Stream 2 should be included also in this price tag, and also financial sanctions and so on. But before we start here, I think we need really an agreement, and I think that's something Europe needs to do now, also with the US together, to end this kind of uncertainty, unclarity. Yeah, so and I think it needs a clear communication, it needs clear sanctions, it needs also European diplomacy being really also part of discussions and acting, especially from the big member states. Yeah, but I just don't see at the moment again who leads on this, and if we can really agree. And I think this is really seen in Moscow, and that's why it will go on. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. Piotr.
Yes, I think 2 points when it comes to the European response. I think the one is on the political level. I think we need to be clear about one thing. I mean, if we want to defend European security order, we need to be ready to pay a price for it, and we need to be ready to pay a certain price now in order to avoid a much higher price in the future. And I think this is probably very difficult for political leaders to communicate to the societies. It is very difficult to apply when it comes to the political decisions. But I think this is the requirement for the European Union and for our countries to be effective in the response to the Russia challenge. And in practical terms, I think it means I have already spoken about sanctions, that I would, so I don't want to repeat myself. But I think in practical terms, what is probably the most important in short term and medium term is the increasing European resilience when it comes to the energy policy. And apparently, this is the situation. The picture is not as bleak as some people believe. I can refer you to an interesting analysis in The Economist lately. There is a new paper by Daniel Gross with SEPS about the European gas reserve and how we can perhaps establish it quite quickly. So I think we need to be strategic about it, because this is something which also can have a very strong impact on the calculations in Russia. So if we can prove, if we can make ourselves much more resilient to this potential threat of cutting off energy deliveries to Europe, I think this is something which again increases the price Putin would have to pay for an aggression. And I do believe that a number of these kind of activities do make a difference.
Thank you very much. Nicholas.
Yeah, very briefly, on this issue of the sanctions proof, I think is a very key question. And I think they have been preparing for it for a long time already. And so I think this is something to take into account. And also they know that about these divisions that all colleagues are mentioning. To me, it's pretty unclear what might happen in the should Russia launch a big scale attack on Ukraine. And I think also that they see a window of opportunity in which benefits outweigh cost, and they are, of course, considering the sanctions. I think it will be very important also in Brussels to have a conversation because I think this perspective in which basically Brussels is seeing the conflict from afar and gradually increasing the sanctions based on the Russian behavior on the field, I think that's too optimistic. That's not going to happen in that way. Russian experts are already saying that we will make sure, or Moscow will make sure, that the security situation becomes very uncomfortable for European states, to make sure that this is not the context. So they are too optimistic and seen with a scaring complacency and feeling of being afar and secure. And I don't think that's, if the worst case scenario becomes a reality, I see that as a very unrealistic expectation on the side of the EU. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Duncan, you will have a final word.
Thank you, Kadri. I would like to go back to Shota's question about sovereignty, because I really do think this is critical. This is the central issue facing us all now. And I echo comments others have made, I think in particular Diana. So Shota asks, would Western countries ever accede to Russia's demands to limit the sovereignty of certain countries in Europe? All I can say is I fervently hope we never ever get to that situation. I really do. Of course, we all want peace and stability and security in Europe. The question is, on what basis, and how can that credibly be built and maintained over the long term? My view, this is my proposition as an analyst and a former policy advisor, is that for European security, the core principles should remain those set out in the Charter of Paris: democracy, fundamental freedoms, and sovereign choice for all countries in Europe. There are weasel-worded terms which I often use by Russia in this kind of discussion, such as the indivisibility of peace. What does that actually mean? That means that Russia demands, first of all, recognition of its supposed position as a great power in Europe with a right to veto any security initiative in Europe it does not like. Secondly, it means that Russia, by implication, is entitled to a sphere of influence around its borders and limited sovereignty for its neighbours. And third, it means that Russia has the right to run its internal affairs as it pleases, free from external criticism. Now, in my view, that position is totally unacceptable and should remain forevermore totally unacceptable for Western countries. Now, of course, that sets us up for a fundamental difference with Russia on these key issues. And this is where I get to the if you like, the general recommendation I would have for Western decision makers. We have to recognize, I think, that in and of itself, a bad relationship with Russia is not contrary to Western interests. It tells us that Western interests are in conflict with Russia's interests, and that the reasons for that need to be understood, and that the stresses and friction and tension and sometimes dangers that give rise to that these differences give rise to need to be managed in all kinds of ways through deterrence. And I fully agree with the comments of other colleagues who've said that Europe as a whole, and I include in that the UK, needs to do far more in terms of hard power, building up hard power deterrent capabilities in this context. It also means managing these differences through dialogue. And I would like to think that at the moment there is some scope to begin a longer term, admittedly very difficult, dialogue with Russia over issues such as conventional arms control in Europe, possibly a revival of some sort of talks between the over intermediate range nuclear weapons, a variety of confidence building measures. All of that is in everybody's interest. But when it comes to fundamental issues, such as those set out in the Charter of Paris, as I say, I fervently hope that Western governments never ever get into the position of compromising those.
Yes, well, that will mean that we need to devise means to defend it, which will not be easy. as I told you, European security order is what it elephant in the room, or what it all boils down to. Thank you very much for all the speakers, to our big audience. I hope we have at least got some overview of different European views. They can be different in nuances, but they are joined by joint vision, the spirit behind the thinking seems to be very much the same. The session will be the session has been recorded, and it will be posted on ECFR website. So those who didn't manage to take notes, I certainly did not, we can go back to recording and listen it in more quiet environment. With that, let's close it. Thank you again very much, and I am sure we will convene again before too long.